I do want to pop this up for you here as we are now also hearing from Netanyahu. His response there on your screen. He says Israel's conditions for ending the war have not changed. The destruction of Hamas military and governing capabilities, the freeing of all hostages, and ensuring that Gaza no longer poses a threat to Israel. Want to talk about all of this here and bring in a friend of the show, Avi Melamed, a former Israeli intelligence official and the founder of Inside the Middle East. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us today.
Hello, Josh. Thank you for having me.
Of course. Well, first off, I do want to get your initial reaction because we heard from Biden during that speech on Friday, and he said the war does need to end. And then he outlined that three-part plan that he said was actually proposed by Israel and approved by the U.S. that still needed to be approved by Hamas. So overall, what are your thoughts, your concerns, your feelings about that deal and how it would play out?
Well, Josh, actually, my major thought is about the things that are not said. And I'm wondering what is beyond the scene. And there must be some things going on beyond the scene. The reason I'm saying that is because in Biden's statement, Biden basically said this is the Israeli offer. And he was mostly addressing the Israelis, trying to explain to the Israelis why they should take the deal. But it's the same time, it's the same offer that was made by the Israeli government. But in the statement, there are two puzzling things, because Biden repeats the mantra that says Hamas rule in Gaza Strip must come to an end, and Hamas would not be able to rearm itself. How is that going to be achieved? This is the thing that puzzles me, and that's the reason why I'm thinking about what is beyond the scene. And my thought on that, for example, is that there is a very significant player that, roughly speaking, almost not mentioned, but it should be mentioned very much, and that is Egypt, and particularly in the context that referred to prevent Hamas the ability to rearm itself. Because Hamas was able to rearm itself because it got massive flow of weapons smuggled to Gaza Strip from Egypt.
And I did pull up that statement that was made by Netanyahu. He's actually spoken just a few times here, and I do actually want to pop up another portion of that statement on your screen. As he says, under the proposal, Israel will continue to insist that those conditions are met before a permanent ceasefire is put into place. The notion that Israel will agree to a permanent ceasefire before those conditions I mentioned are fulfilled is a, quote, non-starter. So my question, does it seem as though we're hearing two different things from Biden and Netanyahu, or are they on the same page here?
I'm not so sure these are two different things. It seems like two different things, but I'm not so sure, because I have almost no doubt that President Biden's statement was coordinated with Israel. He was quoting the Israeli offer. So he basically, obviously, was coordinated with Israel on that statement. I think that we need to read carefully between the lines of the statement, and particularly Netanyahu's statement that was published this Saturday. Part of it is, I would say clearly, is addressing its political base. But I think that it may indicate, again, and it goes back to what I'm puzzled about mostly, and this is the things that have not been said and the things that have not been written. And the big question here in the end of the day is, what exactly is the mechanism that first will make sure that Hamas will not be able to continue and to rule Gaza Strip, will not be able to continue and to rearm itself, and what is the mechanism that will enable in the second phase, that allegedly is supposed to be the phase discussing about releasing of the rest of the hostages after the first phase, what exactly is the mechanism that will make sure in the end of the day that Hamas will be more than willing to negotiate the terms? Those are three things that I don't see in the statement. And the fact that I don't see in the statement is very puzzling, because it's very clear that there must be some sort of mechanism to address those questions. And I wonder why those mechanisms are not mentioned specifically.
I want to take a closer look at what's going on to the north there, because we know that there is the fighting that's intensifying between Hezbollah and Israel. It looks like within the last few hours there have been more attacks there from Hezbollah on Israel, and it almost seems like they're happening at this point on a daily basis. So my question for you, if a deal is reached between Israel and Hamas that does lead to a permanent ceasefire in Gaza, how does that affect the fighting between Israel and Hezbollah? Would it affect it in any way?
Well, Josh, Nasrallah, the leader of Hezbollah, said from the beginning, day one of this war, he said, look, once there is going to be a ceasefire, Hezbollah will hold this fire. So theoretically, once there is a ceasefire agreement reached, Hezbollah basically will have no more reason to continue the fight. There is a lot of outcry in Lebanon. The Lebanese are enormously concerned with the possibility that the Hezbollah once again will drag them to a war that they are not part of, they don't want to be part of. And in the end of the day, they are not the one making the call. It's Hezbollah that makes the call in Lebanon, or to be more accurate, the Iranians.
So at the same time, when Biden was announcing that three-part deal to essentially end the war, Hamas did release another propaganda video featuring one of the hostages taken on October 7th. Does this appear to be more psychological warfare? Because why would they release that at the same time that Biden is saying we have a deal here that could end the war?
Hamas is a very sophisticated player. He knows how to play very well the psychological and the media arenas. He has been doing that all along the way. And unfortunately, I would add, there are some circles in the West who are very receptive to Hamas propaganda and messages. So this is something that Hamas has been doing all the time and will continue to do all the time. This is part of the game, by the way, exactly like what Hezbollah is doing.
Israel has now entered central Rafah. The troops are there. So what is the goal from here?
I think that the core segment in the context of Rafah is the story of the Philadelphia corridor, or the Philadelphia road. This is the road that is kind of like 10 miles long or so between Gaza Strip and Egypt, parallel to the Egypt-Gaza borderline. This is the corridor that beneath, and not less above, huge flow of weapons streamed its way to Gaza Strip for the last years. And there has been many tunnels that reportedly the Egyptians were able to eliminate most of them, but apparently there is a very active industry on both sides, Egypt and Gaza, that is involved in the streaming of weapons into Gaza Strip. As you can understand, there is a lot of money involved here. And so the control over the Philadelphia road that Israel now maintain, that control is supposed, at least theoretically, to give Israel a pressure card on Hamas by suffocating its military oxygen pipelines that are coming from Egypt. Because in the end of the day, that has been the major source of the weapons, the ammunitions, the huge amount of weapons that were streaming to Hamas in Gaza Strip in the last years.
I do want to talk really quickly here about those tunnels that are underneath Egypt, or actually Rafah, that are leading to Egypt. As according to the IDF, there are dozens upon dozens of them that have been discovered. So does that lead to concerns about whether the hostages themselves are actually still in Gaza, or if they have been brought over to Egypt or elsewhere?
Well, I'm familiar with that concern. To the best of my understanding, the assessment in the Israeli intelligence community is that the hostages were not smuggled into Sinai Peninsula, into the Egyptian territory. I tend to believe this is the situation, even though, no one can guarantee it 100%. I think that the Egyptians will be enormously embarrassed if there is going to be such a scenario. But we have to take it into consideration. Unfortunately, we cannot totally rule it out, even though, as I said before, my tendency is to assume that the hostages are kept in Gaza Strip.
All right. Avi Melamed, as always, thank you so much for taking the time to join us and help break down the latest developments there out of the Middle East. Anything else you want to add about any of this before I let you go?
Well, once again, I think that we need to look at the whole story in the wider perspective. Hamas and Islamic Jihad in Gaza are a very significant component in the Iranian master plan to take over the region. We just saw how this master plan has been manifested on the ground and how dangerous this Iranian regime reminding us all its massive barbaric attack on Israel a couple of weeks ago, let alone the massive barbaric attack of Hamas and Islamic Jihad on October 7. North of Israel, we have Hezbollah, another arm of this regime. Those arms have to be chopped. If the region needs stability, and if the region wants to have stability, and if the world wants to have stability, it needs to address the challenge of the terror proxies of the Iranian regime seriously, decisively. Any idea or any attempt to kick the can down the road will result in the next war around the corner.
All right. Avi, as always, thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us. We appreciate it.
Thank you, George. Thank you for having me.